I think Meghan sees enemies everywhere, as he did too. And whereas he was meant that he was really finished with her, he'd had enough of her prima donna behavior, and that's why he's dumped her. But also, money, you need tens of millions of dollars. And what we're seeing is that she can't find a financial backer.
Sometimes the loudest alarm isn't a siren, it's what's not there. And when Meghan and Harry announced the birth of their daughter Lilibet, what was missing was impossible to ignore. Here's the thing. When a baby's born into the crown, there's a very specific sentence that's always included. It's hundreds of years old. It never changes. It says, "The Duchess was safely delivered of a son or daughter." Simple, clear, and most importantly, it shows the mother gave birth. But when Meghan released her announcement, that sentence was gone. Instead, it said Harry and Meghan had welcomed a daughter. Soft wording, gentle wording, but not what's been used for generations. People close to palace traditions said that missing line wasn't an accident. It wasn't modern wording. It was the removal of the one line that showed Meghan physically gave birth. And for the first time, people began asking the question nobody wanted to touch. Why would Meghan avoid saying she gave birth to her own child?
Meghan Markle refused to touch her own baby. You heard that right. Refused to hold, comfort, or even look at little Archie.
What came next gets even stranger. Hit that like button and subscribe with notifications on. You'll want to see this. So let's talk about what actually vanished here, because this isn't just some tiny detail nobody would notice. This is a sentence that's been in every single birth statement for as long as anyone can remember. We're talking hundreds of years. Babies born into the crown across multiple timelines, and each time the identical wording appears. Here's what it always says. The Duchess was safely delivered of a son, or the Duchess was safely delivered of a daughter. That's it. Really formal, really precise, and it never changes, not even by one word. You could go back through decades of these declarations and you'd see the same phrasing repeated again and again. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so what? It's just old-fashioned language, right? But here's the thing. That sentence isn't there to sound pretty or proper. It's not there because someone thought it sounded fancy. It's there to verify.
Reported and examined and investigated.
A huge number of sources wouldn't speak to you, people who were aligned with Meghan.
One particular fact. The mother actually gave birth to the baby. It's a validation, a record of what happened. And in a world where bloodlines determine who gets the crown, that detail matters more than almost anything else. But when Meghan and Harry put out their statement for Lilibet, those words just weren't there. Instead, it said they had welcomed a daughter. Now listen, welcomed is a nice word. It's warm, it's sweet, it's the kind of thing you'd write in a card to a friend who just had a baby. But it's not what's been used each time before this. It doesn't verify anything. It just says the baby arrived. And here's where it gets interesting. This wasn't some creative choice to modernize things. This wasn't them trying to sound more casual or relatable or breaking free from stuffy old customs. People who've studied palace protocol for years, who know all the rules and formalities inside and out, they looked at that release and immediately knew something was off. Because, get this, you can change a lot of things in these official notices.
Markle and Prince Harry were living a peaceful fairy tale life in California, smiling with their children and free from royal.
You can add personal touches. You can make them feel warmer or more emotional. But that one phrase, the safely delivered phrase, that's what's never been touched. That's what matters. Without it, there's no actual verification that Meghan physically gave birth. It's just a notice that a baby exists now. And it's not like this was a mistake either. These things don't just get thrown together in 5 minutes. They're carefully written. Each word is chosen on purpose. So when that particular wording goes missing, when what's been consistent for centuries suddenly isn't there anymore, people notice. The ones who understand what these releases actually mean, they notice right away. So right there, from day one, the question was already hanging in the air. Why would anyone avoid using what's been standard practice for so long? The wording that actually shows what happened. Why replace it with softer language that doesn't really say anything at all? And that question, it was just the beginning. Now here's where where things start getting really interesting because
view, but she did her best to prevent that happening.
Yeah. Now, let's go briefly back to her early life, and there was a lot of...
it's not just about what Meghan and Harry said in their statement. It's about what the palace did next, or more accurately, what they didn't do. See, when a baby's born into the crown, officials don't just sit back and wait for the parents to make their own declaration. They put out their own notice every time. And that notice, it's written in a very particular way. These aren't poetic letters to the public. They're not emotional posts on social media. They're more like formal records wrapped up in elegant wording. Think of them like historical documents that just happen to sound fancy. And there's a reason they're written so carefully. These official notices protect the line to the throne. They make sure there's no confusion, no gray areas, no questions about who this child is and where they came from. Clarity is everything, because in a system where bloodlines determine who gets what, you can't have any doubt, not even a little bit. So what did the palace do when Lilibet was born? They repeated Meghan's version, word for word.
Family life in California. But the maid says with certainty those moments were not real. She insists those scenes could not.
Instead of saying the Duchess of Sussex was safely delivered of a daughter, what's been standard practice, they just said the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have welcomed a daughter. The exact same soft approach Meghan used. Now think about that for a second. Officials have their own standards, their own way of doing things that's been consistent since these notices started. But this time, they didn't use any of it. They just echoed what Harry and Meghan already put out there. And here's what makes that so strange. When organizations do this, when they pass along someone else's claim without adding their own stamp of approval, that's called keeping their distance. It's a subtle move. Most people wouldn't even catch it, but it's essentially a way of saying this is what they're telling us without taking responsibility for it themselves. It's like if your friend tells you they won the lottery and instead of saying, yeah, they won, you just say, they told me they won the lottery. See the difference? One backs them up, the other just passes along what you heard. People who understand how these things work.
Suburban Santa Barbara. The vibe? Existential dread meets bad improv. And somehow,
they noticed this right away because officials didn't take ownership of the information. They didn't put their seal on it. They just copied the Sussex's statement and left it at that. And that raises a pretty big question. If the palace itself didn't use their traditional format, if they didn't declare that Meghan gave birth using the terminology they've used for everyone else, why not? Did they not have the information to back it up? Were they unsure about something? Or were they just being extra careful not to sign off on anything they couldn't personally validate? Whatever the reason, the result was the same. Two notices came out that day, one from Harry and Meghan, one from officials, and neither one actually verified what traditionally gets verified each time. But here's the thing. This whole situation with the missing words and officials staying quiet, it didn't start with Lilibet. It actually started years earlier, on the day Archie was born. And what happened that day was something that had never...
Archie and Lily have finally been unmasked as Prince Harry and
happened before in modern royal history. The palace released an official statement that morning. Standard procedure, right? Baby's born, the world gets told, everyone celebrates. Except a few hours later, something really odd happened. They pulled it down, took it offline, and then they put up a completely different version. Now let me explain why that's so wild. Birth declarations for babies born into the crown don't get rewritten. They just don't. These things are prepared so carefully, checked so thoroughly, that mistakes basically never happen. You're talking about releases that have been done the same way for decades. Everyone knows the drill. Everyone knows what needs to be included. So when one of these has to be taken down and redone, that's not a small thing. That's a massive issue. And according to people who know what happened, the problem wasn't with the folks at the palace. It was with what Harry and Meghan provided. There were facts that didn't match up, times that conflicted with each other, little pieces that just didn't line up the way they should have. Think about what that means for a second.
Explaining that the editorial team showed silent exasperation with her, The staff also wondered, did she consider that
Those are factual documents. They're supposed to state basic, verifiable things. When was the baby born? Where was the baby born? Who was present? It's not complicated stuff. But somehow what they were given initially was inconsistent enough that the whole thing had to be pulled and redone. And that's when people who pay attention started seeing a thread, because it wasn't just the rewrite, it was everything else too. The wording was different from standard format. There were no physicians listed, no hospital identified, no usual phrasing that verified the actual birth, just general statements that a baby existed now. You start connecting all these pieces, and it's hard not to see something off happening. One odd thing? Okay, maybe that's just updating the style. Two odd things? Could be a coincidence. But when you've got a rewritten statement missing doctors, no identified location, and non-standard wording all at once, that's not a coincidence anymore.
Meghan Markle and Prince Harry are probably begging the universe not to ask. Where on earth are Archie and Lilibet? The kids of the Sussexes have practically vanished.
That's a thread you can follow. And for people who understand how carefully these things are normally handled, this was eyebrow-raising, because in all the years of royal births being shared publicly, nothing like this had ever happened before. Not the rewrite, not the absent specifics, not the general language. It was all new ground. So by the time Archie was born, before anyone even knew about Lilibet, there were already concerns circulating. Concerns about why basic facts seemed so hard to nail down. Concerns about why the standard approach was being tossed aside. Concerns about what was really going on behind those carefully worded releases. And nobody from officials or from Harry and Meghan's side ever really addressed any of it. They just moved forward like everything was normal, while people who knew what normal actually looked like were left wondering what they'd just witnessed. So now we need to talk about something that should be really simple to answer, but
Documentary and the whispers, oh, they've gotten dark. That Instagram caption wasn't just off, it was a PR disaster. Meghan thought she was
somehow isn't. Where did Archie enter the world? I know that sounds like the easiest question ever. Every baby who arrives into the crown for as long as anyone can remember has a clearly confirmed birthplace. It's not like some optional fact you can skip. It's not a fun tidbit they throw in if they feel like it. It's a requirement, because when you're talking about kids who could potentially inherit the throne someday, you need to know exactly where they came from. That's just how it works. But with Archie, here's what's wild. No hospital ever said, yes, this baby arrived here. No medical facility made any kind of statement. Nobody from any healthcare team said a single word about delivering a royal baby. And trust me, that's not normal. Think about how these things usually go. When a baby arrives into this family, the place where it happens becomes part of the story. It gets mentioned, it gets recorded. Sometimes there are even photos of the parents leaving with the newborn.
Why don't Harry's children have African-American features? Is Meghan their biological mother? In 2018, before marriage,
the location becomes a known fact that gets written down. It's all very straightforward. But in Archie's case, there's just nothing. No validated site, no named professionals, no facility that's gone on record. To this day, if you try to find out which place Archie came into the world, you're not going to get a clear answer, because there isn't one publicly available. And here's what makes this even more eyebrow-raising. These weren't just any babies. These were kids who got placed in the inheritance line. That means they're officially recognized as having a potential path to the throne. And in a system that's built entirely on bloodlines and heritage, you'd think the very first requirement would be proving where these kids entered the world and who helped bring them here. But that didn't happen. For the first time in modern history, two individuals were placed in line without any of the usual records. No confirmed site, no identified team, no public files that match up with what was stated. Just empty spots where concrete facts should be.
Meghan in his new magazine, and he apparently paused before replying, Meghan and I.
Now, in a regular family, nobody would care. You don't need to broadcast where your baby arrived or who your doctor was. That's private stuff. But this isn't a regular family. This is a family where every fact matters, because every fact protects the validity of the entire system. When you're talking about who could inherit one of the most famous positions in the world, those facts aren't just nice to have. they're necessary. And yet somehow, with Archie and later with Lilibet, all of those necessary pieces were either missing or never publicly confirmed. The facilities stayed quiet. The doctors never spoke up. The usual process of recording and verifying everything just didn't happen. So you're left with this really uncomfortable reality. Two individuals in the inheritance line, and nobody can definitively point to where they entered the world or who delivered them. That's not supposed to be possible. In a system that's existed for centuries, specifically to avoid
Royal rumor. Let me stop you there. This one's different. Because for the first time in nearly a century, Parliament, not the palace, is
this kind of uncertainty. It shouldn't be possible, but it is, and it happened. And nobody with the authority to clarify any of it has ever come forward to fill in those gaps. Now let's move to Lilibet, because if you thought the Archie situation was peculiar, what happened with Lilibet's paperwork takes things to a whole different level. Here's something most people don't know. Official records for newborns have a registration code on them. It's one of those things you never really look at unless you're specifically searching for it. Just a string of digits that seems random and meaningless. But those digits aren't random at all. They actually tell you something really specific. They tell you where the document was issued. In California, every official record starts with the same 3 digits, 104. That's the state identifier. It's consistent. It's standardized. Every single baby registered in California gets paperwork that begins
anymore. It's her business card, her brand identity, her golden crown emoji. Every deal, every interview, every luxury part
with that sequence. No exceptions. It's how the system works. So when people who pay attention to these kinds of things examine Lilibet's documentation, they notice something immediately. The registration code didn't start with 104. According to what they saw, it started with 105, which, if you know anything about how these identifiers work, is a completely different state. Now, that doesn't automatically mean something fishy happened, but it does mean the paperwork doesn't follow the system that every other California newborn follows. And here's the kicker. No clarification was ever given for why. No explanation. No response saying, oh, there was a reason for that different identifier, just silence. For a normal family, this would just be a weird bureaucratic quirk that nobody would ever notice or care about. But we're not talking about a normal family. We're talking about a child who was placed into the line of succession. A child whose birthplace and origins are supposed to be absolutely clear.
And their photo taken, and they put them out, or someone got them and sold them. There's 2 different stories. I don't know.
And when the paperwork itself creates confusion instead of providing answers, that's concerning. But wait, because it gets even more eyebrow-raising. Right after people started noticing this unusual registration code, something else happened. The physician who allegedly brought Lilibet into the world, the doctor whose name should have been all over this historic moment, she ended her practice, just stopped. 2 weeks after this royal arrival that should have been the highlight of her career, she was done. No interview where she talked about the experience, no public comment confirming her role, no photo op or congratulations from medical organizations. Zero connection of her name to this arrival at all. She just quietly closed up shop and walked away. Think about how backwards that is. When physicians help bring babies into this family who are going to be in line for the throne, that's usually something they're proud of. It becomes part of their professional legacy. They get interviewed, they get recognition.
Has not allowed your father to see his grandchildren so far.
Well, that's...
Sometimes they even get honors for it. It's a big deal. But here, there was just radio silence. This physician helped with what should have been one of the most talked about arrivals of the year. And instead of celebrating or even acknowledging it, she closed her entire practice within weeks. Healthcare providers don't usually step away from their careers after helping with a world-famous arrival. If anything, it tends to boost what they do. But in this case, the opposite happened. So now you've got 2 really peculiar things happening at the exact same time. Paperwork with an unusual registration identifier that nobody's addressed, and a doctor who stepped back from her practice right when all this was being noticed. maybe there are perfectly logical reasons for both of these things. Maybe the identifier difference is just some technical issue nobody bothered to address. Maybe the physician had totally unrelated reasons for closing her practice right then. But when you're already looking at a situation filled with missing confirmations,
shaking, it's biting back. Word from the streets of Westminster is that the UK Parliament has had enough of royal drama.
unidentified locations, and vague wording, these new oddities don't exactly help make things clearer. They just add more mysteries to a pile that keeps getting taller. Now, here's where everything moves from paperwork and official statements to actual human perspective. Because we're not just talking about documents and codes anymore. We're talking about someone who was actually there, living in the house, witnessing the day-to-day reality. There was a worker who was at the Montecito home during the exact time Meghan would have been in those final stages with Lilibet. And what she said later is pretty jaw-dropping. She says that during all that time she was working there, she never noticed a baby bump. Not once. Let that sink in for a second. This wasn't someone peeking through windows from the street. This was someone who was inside the house regularly. Someone who would have encountered Meghan moving around, going about her daily routine, probably multiple times a day. Someone who had access to areas where you can't hide details.
Suddenly at the center of a constitutional thunderstorm. Sources claim lawmakers are revisiting King George V's letters patent.
And according to her, Meghan looked active, energetic, constantly in motion, but never physically showing. She described watching Meghan go through that period appearing completely normal. No visible changes, no obvious signs, nothing that would make you think, oh, she's definitely expecting right now. Regular activity, regular appearance, business as usual, the kind of appearance you'd have on any normal day when you're not carrying a child. And we're not talking about early stages here where maybe you wouldn't show yet. We're talking about the time frame when most women are very obviously expecting, when there's no hiding it, when even loose clothing can't really conceal what's happening. But according to this worker, there was nothing to notice. Now fast forward to when Harry and Meghan's Netflix series came out. This worker sat down to watch it like everyone else. And there were scenes in that series showing Meghan with a large belly, full appearance of late-stage expectancy.
At sunrise. For Meghan, it's not just about losing a title. It's about losing the foundation of her entire post-royal life.
Very obvious, very visible. The kind of footage that shows exactly what you'd expect during that time. And her reaction, she was stunned because she felt like she was looking at footage of a moment she'd never actually witnessed in person, like watching a movie about events that didn't align with her own memory of that period. It didn't line up with what she'd experienced day after day while working in that house. She was looking at images that supposedly captured the same time frame she'd been living through, but they looked completely foreign to her experience. Think about how disorienting that must have been. You work somewhere for a while, you encounter someone regularly, you have your own clear memories of what that time was like, and then you watch a documentary about that same period. And what's being shown doesn't correspond with what you remember at all. Not a small disconnect. A fundamental difference in what's being presented versus what was actually encountered. This isn't a definitive answer to anything.
She's got to the top of the social tree. And somehow or other, you, Samantha, your dad.
But it is first-hand perspective from someone who was physically present during the time frame in question. And in a story that's already filled with missing details and unanswered mysteries, personal accounts like this create another layer worth paying attention to. But here's where it gets even more complicated, because there's this old story that's been floating around for years. Meghan's half-brother once said something pretty specific about her past. He mentioned she'd had something happen years ago, something that, according to him, would change the whole picture. Now, is that story confirmed? No. Is it validated? No. Could it be completely false? Absolutely. Family members say stuff. People have motives. Drama happens, relationships get messy, and people make statements. We can't just take it as fact without any backup. Half-siblings, especially ones who aren't close, sometimes say stuff that isn't accurate or fair. But here's why it matters in this context. If there was any truth to that statement, even a possibility,
Lilibet, were they really royal heirs? Why did the palace stay quiet? Why did the children never appear in the same way William and Kate?
Then suddenly, all the other pieces start making a different kind of sense. The missing sentence in the announcement, the unusual paperwork codes, the unidentified hospitals, the physicians who stayed quiet, the worker who noticed nothing. All of it could potentially connect to one explanation that would make the whole puzzle fit together. Again, we're not saying it's accurate. We're saying it's part of the larger picture, a picture that's made up of a bunch of pieces that individually might mean nothing, but together create this web of elements that don't quite line up. One odd detail by itself is just strange, but when you start stacking them up, when you get 5, 6, 7 unusual elements all in the same story, it becomes harder to dismiss as coincidence. And when you combine someone's personal perspective, someone who was there in the house during that time, with old family statements that refuse to go away, plus all the official oddities we've already talked about.
Unthinkable. She leaked them herself. Yes, you heard that right. The woman who told the world she was protecting her kids from...
You end up with a situation that's hard to ignore. It's not about confirming anything. It's about recognizing that there's a whole lot of smoke here. And when there's this much smoke, when there are this many disconnected pieces that all seem to point in a similar direction, people start wondering if there might be fire underneath it all. Human nature makes us look for connections. We try to make sense of situations that don't make sense. The worker's account doesn't confirm anything happened. The family statement doesn't confirm anything happened. But what they both do is contribute to this growing sense that the official story doesn't align with what people actually experienced or know. They bring human voices to what could otherwise just be dismissed as paperwork errors or procedural changes. And that gap between what we're told and what people experienced, that gap between the polished Netflix footage and the reality someone lived through, it's what keeps this whole situation alive.
Meghan and Harry have been preaching about protecting their children's privacy. No pap shots, no media intrusion, no...
It's what makes people keep asking even when no answers come. Because at the end of the day, when someone who is actually there says, "What I'm looking at doesn't align with what I encountered," you can't just wave it away. A real person with real memories saying the pieces don't fit. And in a situation already filled with pieces that don't fit, that voice carries weight. Okay, so we've covered a lot of strange details, missing information, and odd circumstances. But now we need to talk about why any of this actually matters. Because there are rules, real rules that have existed for a very long time. And those rules exist for a specific reason. For a child to be placed in the inheritance line, to be officially recognized as someone who could potentially inherit the throne, there are 4 specific things that have to be true. And these aren't new standards. They've been this way for ages, literally hundreds of years. They were created to protect the family line and make sure there's never any confusion about who belongs and who doesn't.
Cause pain and upset.
But specifically these articles.
It's a broader statement.
But you're here to put a stop to
Here's what those 4 standards are. First, the child must come from both a mother and father in the traditional sense. Second, the couple has to be legally married in the Church of England. Third, that ties back to the first point about lineage. And fourth, this is the big one. The child must be born from the mother's body. That last point is the foundation of everything. It's why, historically, there used to be observers present at royal births. Actual people in the room whose job was to watch and attest that, yes, this baby came from this mother. It sounds invasive by today's standards, and honestly it was, but that's how seriously they took this standard. It's also why palace doctors used to sign off on everything. They weren't just there to deliver the baby safely. They were there to record what happened, to put their professional reputation on the line and say, "I was present, I saw this birth, and I can attest this child came from this mother." Their signature meant something.
As their birthright.
William is willing to cut a limb in order to save the body. He's willing to even sacrifice.
It created an official record that couldn't be questioned. These weren't just customs for the sake of customs. They were protections, ways to ensure that down the line, nobody could question someone's place in the inheritance. Because in a setup where everything depends on bloodline, you can't have doubt. You can't have gray areas. You need absolute certainty. So given all of that, given how how important these standards are supposed to be, what happened with Archie and Lilibet is pretty remarkable. There was no announcement that these standards were met, no doctors who came forward to attest to anything, no observers who could say they were present, no usual wording in the releases that would typically signal all of this had been properly recorded. Just quiet, just vague language and missing details, and an assumption that everyone would simply accept what they were told without any of the usual attestations. And here's what's so striking about that.
Internet has gone absolutely wild with theories about Archie and Lilibet. And honestly, can you blame people?
The monarchy has spent ages building protocols specifically designed to prevent this exact situation. They created all these procedures and standards and recording processes because they knew that without them, the whole foundation gets shaky. When you can't confirm someone's place in the bloodline, you can't confirm their right to be in the succession. But somehow with these two kids, all of those age-old protections just didn't get applied. Or at least they didn't get applied where anyone could see. Maybe everything happened behind closed doors. Maybe all the proper attestations were made privately. But if they were, nobody's said so. Nobody's come out and stated, yes, all standards were met, all protocols were followed, everything was recorded properly. Instead, we got soft language. We got releases that carefully avoided the usual phrasing. We got an absence of the things that have always been present before. And for a setup that's supposed to be so careful about these things, that's not just unusual. It's a fundamental shift.
Details and the couple's obsessive control over every narrative. Whether there's any truth to it or
in how the rules get applied. It's the first time in modern history where kids were placed in line without any of the visible verification that's always accompanied that placement. You can't help but wonder why. Why change hundreds of years of protocol for these specific cases? Why abandon the protections that have always been considered essential? What made this situation different enough to justify throwing out all the usual expectations for visible attestation? Those are the mysteries that don't have answers. And in a setup built entirely on certainty and clarity, mysteries without answers are troubling. Because the whole point of those four standards, the whole reason they exist, is to eliminate mysteries, to make everything so clear and well recorded that there's no room for doubt. But when the records disappear, when the attestations never come, when the doctors stay silent and the usual language gets replaced with something softer, doubt is exactly what you're left with.
Harry was found unconscious by his well-known longtime personal friend bodyguard, unconscious.
So let's step back and look at everything we've covered here. Because when you line it all up, piece by piece, you start to see something bigger than just individual oddities. There's that absent sentence in Lilibet's statement, the one line that's been standard for hundreds of years, the one that actually confirms the mother gave birth, just gone, replaced with softer language that doesn't really say anything concrete. There's the palace repeating vague wording instead of using their own traditional format. Officials who normally have very specific ways of doing things suddenly just echoing what they were told, keeping their distance from the information. There's Archie's release getting pulled down and rewritten, something that's never happened before in modern history. A correction that shouldn't have been necessary if everything was straightforward from the start. There's no hospital that anyone can name, no facility that's ever said, yes, this is where it happened. No location on record anywhere, which is absolutely unheard of for children placed in the inheritance line.
Gates closed on another chapter of royal chaos. One question lingered in the air. If the Duchess is gone, who is Meghan now?
There are unusual paperwork codes on Lilibet's documents, numbers that don't match the standard California setup, no explanation given, no clarification offered, just a discrepancy that sits there unanswered. There's a doctor who closed her practice 2 weeks after allegedly delivering a royal baby, the kind of event that should be a career highlight, but instead she just walked away with no comment, no interview, no word at all. There's a worker who was in the house during those months saying she never noticed any physical signs. Someone who was actually there day after day, watching someone who supposedly was in the final stages but never looked at, and then being shocked when she later saw footage showing the complete opposite. There's an old family statement about a procedure that would make the whole thing impossible. Something that's been floating around for years that nobody's ever really addressed or denied. And there are age-old standards that are supposed to protect the bloodline, protocols that have existed for ages, specifically to prevent uncertainty.
Archie and Lily on Instagram. What's most interesting to me, though, is this clash.
Standards that apparently didn't get publicly applied the way they always have before. This isn't about scandal. This isn't about tearing anyone down or making claims. It's about recognizing that when you stack all these pieces together, when you look at everything as a whole instead of isolated incidents, there's a thread of absence. Confirmations that never came, locations nobody can name, doctors who stayed quiet, standard language that got replaced. Just a lot of blank spaces where there should be concrete facts. And here's the thing about the monarchy. The entire institution is built on one foundation, knowing exactly who's in the lineage. That's it. That's what makes the whole thing work. When you know exactly who came from where, when you can trace every connection without any doubt, it functions. The inheritance line makes sense. The order of succession stays clear. But when that knowledge starts to slip, when mysteries pile up without answers,
is sending shockwaves across the internet. For years, rumors have swirled about
when the usual confirmations never come, what happens then? What happens to an institution that requires absolute transparency when transparency is exactly what's gone? That absent sentence in Lilibet's statement might seem like a small detail, just one line that got changed or forgotten. But maybe it wasn't small at all. Maybe that was when something fundamental shifted, when ages of protocol quietly got set aside, when the standards everyone thought were essential turned out to be negotiable. And the strangest part of all of this, nobody's really talking about it. Not officially, not in public. The mysteries just hang there, unanswered. The gaps remain unfilled. The quiet continues. And that quiet might be the loudest thing of all. If this got you thinking, drop a like and let me know what you make of all this in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe. Thanks for watching.